Clash of the Classics.
Hey, that's right, folks. It's time for Clash of the Classics. I'm Donnie.
And I'm Chris.
Hey, great to have you guys here. And we welcome you to another episode of Horsepower for an Hour. If you're new to the show, hey, perhaps this is the first time that you're tuning us in. You're going to find every week we roll the clock back. We take a look at two classic models. We pit them against one another. We look at exterior styling. We take a look at interior stuff, powertrain design. Then we vote on the car that we like best here in studio. And as always, we welcome you to go onto either our Facebook page or our website, wherever you feel comfortable with, and let us know which car that you like. These battles are fueled by the largest automatic transmission network in the world. They are the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, or simply the ATRA. Today, the battle is between the 1968 Olds 442 and the 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner. I want to start with that Oldsmobile. Back in 1964, Oldsmobile introduced an all-new option package for Cutlass models that were sold here in the United States. They called it the 442 Pontiac back in those days. Many of our listeners will remember they were having an incredible success with that V8 powered 389 Le Mans, and then Chevy, you remember, was leading the pack with the Chevelle. In fact, Chevelle was doing very well back then. Well, not to be outdone, Oldsmobile followed suit, and then they equipped their restyled Cutlass with a 330 cubic inch V8, and with it, the Oldsmobile 442 was born. In '65, they continued with the popular 442, but they modified it, putting in a 345 horsepower, 400 cubic inch V8. But of all of the Oldsmobiles that have been produced ever in the entire history of the company, man, they hit a home run with this 442.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's clear that, GM kind of shares their body styles between brands. So it's pretty obvious that they're taking a bite off of the Chevelle here. But it's muscular, it's cool looking. It kind of goes against, the image that you get in your head when you hear the word Oldsmobile. It just doesn't sound exciting, but this one is contrary to that.
Yeah, I liked the Cutlass all along, even back when I was a kid. One of my best friends had one in high school, and excellent car. And now that the 442 has always been one of my favorites. I want to talk about what 442 means for those of you out there who may not be familiar with the badging. 442 stands for 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and then dual exhaust, hence the 442. And then one interesting note is beginning in '65, the standard transmission that came in the car was a 3-speed manual. The 2-speed automatic also became available as an option, as well as a 4-speed manual, but regardless of which transmission you chose, it still is called a 442. It's an icon in the muscle car world for sure. It became a separate model from '68 through 71, I think it was. Then in '68, Olds sold more than 33,000 units, and the popularity of the car was definitely on the rise. I had a chance to experience what I think is a gorgeous 1968 Olds 442 a couple days ago. The owner, his name is Blake Melsevnish, and he lives out in Southern California area. He's got a gorgeous 442 that's been professionally restored to almost near original condition. This thing is really beautiful. I had a blast driving it. The 455, 370 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. Definitely an adrenaline rush, at least for me. And that Turbo 400 that he's got in the car, it was built right because it gets second-gear rubber really easily. But this is a really cool car to drive.
Yeah, it really is. I thoroughly enjoy this.
Well, we spent the morning cruising some of the back roads just outside of Los Angeles, California. It's a small town called Fillmore, and I got to tell you, I didn't want to get out of the car. You talk about a rush. I mean, this is the pinnacle of performance, especially when it comes to Oldsmobile. It doesn't get better than a 442. Don't see a lot of these around. In fact, the car shows that you and I frequent with Horsepower for an Hour, we occasionally will see a few of them. There's one guy who used to build cars for Warner Brothers Studios, and he's got 16 or 17 cars. 2 of them are 442s, and he's done an outstanding job, reproducing or restoring them. Phil is his name, Phil LaPachelle, and he has done a wonderful job. But it's just not a car that we see a ton of.
Yeah, you really, again, with this kind of general body style, it's usually the Chevelle. So that leads me to ask, since there are less of the Oldsmobile that you see at the car shows, Does that make them increase in value in comparison to the Chevelle?
And see, now that's common logic. And while I agree with common logic, most of the time, one thing about common sense and common logic is not common amongst everyone. The answer is no. And I learned that from our in-studio appraiser, Mr. Ken Hale. I used to think the same thing. Because there's less of it, it must be rarer, so then it must be more valuable. And in some cases, yes. In other cases, no. The 442, obviously, especially the W30 models, can get well into six figures. So to answer your question, it can. Doesn't always, and in the 442 case, it just depends on what kind of shape it's in, if it's still numbers matching, if it's all original type thing, if it's beat up and in serious need of help and serious need of attention, then obviously it's going to be less in value. But good question though.
What's the ballpark number on a number 2 car?
Number 2 car around between 40 to 60,000.
Okay, not bad.
Yeah,
not bad.
Not bad at all. I think the original MSRP, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a few minutes, but I think it was somewhere around, I'll check my notes, $3,000, $3,900, something like that, back in 1968. But getting back to some early history, the engine displacement was originally a 400 cubic inch displacement. The base motor was rated at 350 horsepower, but only with a standard 3-speed and then the optional 4-speed. The automatic transmissions were rated right at 325 horsepower. Blake's car, the one that we have pictured on the screen right now, the one you're looking at as we're having this interview, has the 455 with 370 horsepower and a whopping 500 pound-feet of torque. It's definitely an adrenaline rush, and that Turbo 400 transmission that he's got in that car really works well. The 1968 442, definitely one of our favorite models here on Horsepower for an Hour. It's arguably one of the most identifiable supercars, at least to me, and I think you would agree, in the GM lineup. 1970, General Motors lifted the cap on engine size, and Oldsmobile immediately responded by making the 455 the standard 442 engine as opposed to an option. But the output now is 365 ponies, and then that same 500 pound-feet of torque, which, I mean, you throttle into Blake's car, and it is immediately recognizable. This car's got some, got some serious big cojones. This thing runs really good. But 1968 through 1970, Oldsmobile 442s, arguably the best performance models that Oldsmobile ever produced, definitely the epitome of muscle car styling. They were comfortable. As far as I was concerned, they were sporty. Price tag, again, easy on the bank account. Let me pull my notes up here. Yeah, it looks like its original MSRP was $3,376. So today, and you asked about what will the car typically be worth, $40,000 to $60,000 on a typical 442. If you're lucky enough to own a true W30 model, that can command up to $100,000. It was 2002 that the last Oldsmobile drove off the assembly line. It was a Cutlass. And, the send-off, to me, was sad. It was a nameplate founded over a century ago. And I guess it's proof positive, dude, that, all good things must come to an end. It's kind of interesting to me. Between the three kind of spin-offs with General Motors, I'm talking Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac, it seems interesting to me that the two that were the cooler of the three are the ones that are gone, and Buick is the one that remains.
I've never understood that.
I can't get it either. I mean, and to you Buick owners out there, I'm not trying to in any way be disrespectful, but, man, an Olds or definitely a Pontiac Star Chief? Come on. A Firebird? A Trans Am?
Trans Am is that
Come on,
right
man.
There. It's like, okay, again, Buick owners, not trying to be disrespectful, but you don't have a Pontiac.
There's no way, because Buick is stoic.
Yeah. I mean, the Riviera's cool, but again, it's no Trans Am.
But before I go any further, I want to talk about the largest automatic transmission network on the planet. They're the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. The ATRA makes our class of the classics possible. No one knows transmissions better than ATRA. With a member network stretching coast to coast, I'm talking California to Florida, there is no better place to be when your car is experiencing transmission trouble than an authorized ATRA service provider. Head on over to atra.com. There you're going to find a service provider member near you. All right, let's talk about that 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner. The 68 through 70 models were based loosely on the Belvedere, which is coincidentally, one of my favorite Mopars. In fact, whenever I see one of these cars, the first thing I think of, and I can't help it, it's that old TV show, Adam 12. That show debuted in '68, and it was definitely one of my all-time favorites. Back then, the look of the front end was so unique, so cool. I remember wanting one of these cars really bad. I wanted to put the old Krager rims on it and then, jack the back of it up, put 15s or 16s on the back, 15s on the front, make it look, kind of cool.
Yeah. Hey, do you think Plymouth paid Adam 12 to have the car in there, kind of like Avengers had Acura, that one shameless shot?
And I never knew. Well, I don't know. No, I would have to say no. And the reason why I say that is because I can't think of the guy who produced the program, Jack Webb. He was such a stickler for detail that I believe the Los Angeles Police Department was already under contract with Plymouth, and so they just used the car because it was already
that's
a
cool.
true police car.
Keeping it authentic.
Yeah, in fact, that was one thing. When we talked with Kent McCord, who played Reed on the show, we actually had him here. You remember that conversation?
I do.
We had? He went on in some detail, I might add, that Jack Webb was very much so into the details as far back as or as detail-oriented as, how the stops were made, what questioning or what line of questioning the suspects would be given back then, and again, how things have changed. But yeah, I would think, to answer your question, I don't know that Plymouth paid anything to the studios. I just think that it was rolled in because the LA Police Department already was using them. But the interior was a basic vinyl bench seat. Some models didn't even have carpeting, and there were a few options available: power steering, front disc brakes, the AM radio, air conditioning, except with the 426 Hemi, that is, and an automatic transmission were about the only thing you could order. The floor-mounted shifter, which was for the 4-speed models, featured only a rubber boot, and they had no console so that the bench seat could be used. Now, here's a fun fact, though, talking about Plymouth paying studios. Plymouth paid $50,000 to Warner Brothers Studios to use that little Roadrunner, the cartoon Roadrunner Coyote, little cartoon character. Well, they paid $50,000 to buy the rights to use the cartoon image of the Roadrunner on the back of the car. And then they paid an additional, check this out, they paid an additional $10,000 to develop the horn to make it sound like the beep beep when the Roadrunner would make a beep beep.
That's a bold choice. I mean, to have a product so closely identified with one specific image, cartoon nonetheless, I don't know, seems kind of bold.
And that was a cool thing back then. People, or I shouldn't say people, car companies weren't afraid to take that step. Now, one of the questions a lot of people ask is, why does the Nissan look like the Toyota, which looks like the Chevy, which looks like the Ford? They all look identical. You take the badges off them, and you can't tell one from the next.
Yeah, when you have a pretty diverse demographic of car buyers, I feel like you'd probably have to be less diverse with your selection to appeal to everybody, right?
And nobody wants to take a chance on the flop. Case in point would be the Chrysler's, well, not the PT Cruiser. It was the other one, the Prowler, the Plymouth Prowler.
I saw one of those the other day, just driving. I forgot all about them. I was like, I remember that car.
In theory, when you think about what should have been a huge, gigantic hit, was a huge, gigantic flop, and so Plymouth took a huge hit, or Chrysler Corporation took a huge hit money-wise in terms of design and production on the car, and that's, I guess, the case in point, or the perfect example as to why car companies are now fearful to try to launch out with something that's super unique, super innovative, super different. It's like, well, we know that this body style works, and we can track it and measure its success by everybody else's success.
You see the same thing really happening in the entertainment industry. I mean, maybe my perception has changed, but have you noticed all the remakes coming out of movies?
Oh, absolutely. The older stuff, yeah.
God, there's so many, I can't even think of one. But you get that, you get the music industry. I mean, going back to 1968, that was the technical birth of one of my favorite bands, Rush. Signed in 74, and that record company really took a chance on them and helped them grow rather than the mindset today of let's find what sells and let's make a quick buck and then dump them in 2 years.
Yeah, because that was a completely different sound. Rush had a completely, very progressive, but Geddy Lee's voice was so unique. You either loved him or you hated him.
But I mean, look at the business side of that record company sticking with them even through that dark time where they could have easily said, okay, you're done.
Like with Crush of Steel, you mean?
Yeah.
Which was an excellent album, by the way.
In terms of sales, no.
Horrible. In fact, it tanked.
Yeah.
But in terms of
that was
quality,
what they called the Down the Tubes tour, 1975.
But in terms of musical quality, it was fantastic. I think Bastille Day is probably my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it was the prototype to what would come after it, which is one of their best albums of all time.
Fly By Night, was it?
No, 2112 came next.
Yeah, but excellent band, no question about that. But back to the Roadrunner. The standard engine in the Roadrunner was the 383 with 335 horsepower and a whopping 425 pound-feet of torque and a 4-speed manual transmission. Well, the original MSRP was a little less than the Oldsmobile for the Plymouth. It was at $2,896. Today, a clean matching numbers car can easily, like I just said, fetch 6 figures, in some cases well into 7 figures. But it's time to tell, Chris, which car do you like and why?
Well, I think with the Roadrunner, I mentioned that it's pretty bold to kind of go with the Roadrunner image. That being said, I do like it. I mean, we had the chance. We drove one a couple months ago. Yeah. I mean, we drive them kind of often, but I remember the first time I noticed that little Roadrunner. I was like, interesting, but I like it.
Cool.
And I get just looking at it, I love that late '60s, early '70s Mopar, and then you throw the value on it. It's a no question home run, whatever other cliche catchphrase. It's the Roadrunner for me.
Okay, so Roadrunner for you. So we're gonna have to have someone call in, let us know what the tiebreaker is, because for me, I got to stick with that Olds 442, only in the fact that, well, I love the Mopar, and I said at the top of the set that Adam 12 program is probably one of my all-time favorites in terms of nostalgia. That Olds 442, God, the Cutlass, the 442, there's just something so beefy, so meaty. Now, I agree with you in terms of the value, can't argue with your point of view there. But when you're in the car, and again, we've driven both these cars, that Roadrunner that we had, I guess it was a couple weeks, whatever it was, between now and a month ago, time goes by so quickly. Whatever it was, a couple weeks back when we drove that orange one, that was a survivor car. That car there was nothing different about it right now than there was in 1968. In fact, the owner purchased it, paid, I think, $146,000 for the car. It only has 29,000 original miles on it. It's a true survivor car. So what you and I drove that day when you were passenger and I was driving, that was exactly what it was in 1968. Now you get into the 68 442 and there's just this more solid kind of a manly, aggressive, rugged feel to it where I just didn't feel that in the Mopar. Now I like the styling of the Mopar, but between the two cars, I'm going to have to take the Olds 442. Once again, big shout out to Blake. And for allowing me to drive his car a couple weeks back. That was a blast. But yeah, I'm going to ride with the Olds, so let us know which car you like. Today's Clash of the Classics made possible by the largest automatic transmission network in the world. They are the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, or simply the ATRA. With certified service providers all across America, it's easy to find peace of mind when it comes to transmission service and repair. Next time your car is having transmission troubles, head on over to atra.com to find an authorized transmission service provider near you. Okay, folks, we'll see you next time.